Welcome to the Multifaceted Executive, the podcast where leadership meets diversity, innovation, and impact. We go beyond boardrooms and titles to bring you powerful stories and insights from executives of all backgrounds. Get ready to challenge conventional thinking, gain fresh perspectives, and discover the leadership lessons you won't hear anywhere else. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddie, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Multifaceted Executive Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddie, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. For those that are with us for the first time, a multifaceted executive is a leader that has many facets. They're not defined by a single industry, background, or leadership style, but rather their ability to adapt, inspire, and create impact across different spaces. This episode is a must listen for anyone who's ever felt silenced, sidelined, or unsure if their voice belongs in the room. Joining me today is Dave Walsh, the founder of TrueTell, a global coaching platform that teaches leaders how to speak with vulnerability, presence, and power. Dave helps leaders find their voice and reclaim it. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today, and I invite you to further introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Well, Amanda, thank you for that introduction and having me here for a conversation that's so important right now in our world in terms of the vulnerability and the ability for people to find their voices. As Amanda said, I am the founder and CEO of a program called the TrueTell. This particular section is the TrueTell for business leaders. The program is designed to teach people how to find that connection. We're going to talk about the word connection a lot today. The connection really to their authenticity of who they are and what they believe in. The whole idea of having authenticity is so important in this world of leadership, particularly in the world of vulnerability. I've had my own personal journey that we'll get into later of how I found my own vulnerability and authenticity. But this is what the program is designed to do, to help you find that incredibly effortless place of communicating from a place of pure joy, a place of pure empowerment, and particularly in the leadership space.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we need to learn what it means to truly be authentic. Part of what you said is connection is going to be important. And so I'm excited to dive into that with you. Let's start with the origins of your voice and visibility. So there were some early signs of that at a young age for you, right? I think it was in the form of puppet shows and radio voices. And what did the love of voice and storytelling mean to you growing up?
I've always been in love with voice, the sound of my voice. I don't know what it was that started, but it was a very organic thing. We'll get to the puppet shows in a second. It was always a love of imitation, of the sound of the voice. This was in the days in the mid-1970s, those of you that are of this particular age. Audio recorders were very big. VCRs were not existent. There were no video cameras or things like that. So what I would do would be audio record television shows and movies and then memorize them and then lip sync the program. And I would perform this and my parents, God love them, they were incredibly supportive and empathetic, but they'd have their friends that came for dinner. I would perform for them, right? These people were so gracious. We had a family friend who said to my mother one day, if this kid doesn't go into entertainment in some form, you've failed as a parent. For me, it was more about the connection, there's that word, the connection of making people feel good, making them laugh, making them maybe amazed at what I did, but it was my way of connecting to people with something special. I was a gay kid growing up. I didn't play football. I didn't play baseball. I didn't play any sports. So I didn't have that connection that a lot of boys have. And the way that I found my value was in making other people feel good about entertainment. That was where it came from. There was something about the connection to the voice and performance that really made me excited and happy. But when I was 12, I created a puppet show. There was an organization called the Muscular Dystrophy Association. A lot of you may remember it. Jerry Lewis was the chairman. And every Labor Day, there would be a muscular dystrophy telethon. Well, I decided to create a puppet show and all the proceeds would go to MDA. So I did that for 2 summers. It was really, I mean, again, creating something that everyone I know that was around at that point remembers it. That's what I love, is people remembering, even if it were corny as a grown adult talking about it, there's something about what you did that made it special, that had value, that gave me the feeling like I had a place in the world.
I really love that perspective because so there's a few things I want to circle back to here. I think to one, what you just mentioned, experiences as we're growing up in our childhood come back to us in adulthood. You shared an example with the puppets and being part of MDA from my own experience too. I remember, so my mother was a single mother before she met my stepfather, and she had to bring me to work. Sometimes there wasn't enough money for childcare. There wasn't a babysitter around to help. And luckily, her job, graciously enough, let her bring me to her job. And it was the leather center. It's not in business anymore, but it was a furniture store. And my mom has always been sales driven. It comes naturally to her. So I picked up a lot on that as a child. And I remember pretending that I was on the phone with a client that was calling in. I would say, "Hi, thank you for calling Leather Center." And it made me feel so happy and so much joy. But in that moment, I didn't think to myself, oh, later down the road, I'm going to be a sales leader. Sometimes we forget about those moments as children that, wow, some of the things we're doing today are really things that we were passionate about, even as a kid. I also love how you started with loving the sound of your voice because we can be so judgmental about our own voices. And I've said it to my husband before. I'm like, I didn't know my voice sounded like that. And so it's as little as the sound of your voice that makes you feel fearful, right? To speak authentically, to be
Absolutely.
authentic, to
Yep.
build connections because you're afraid of maybe how others will perceive your voice or what you have to say.
Absolutely. And the thing too is it could be one thing that a kid said to you when you were 14, or when their voices are changing, when they're, some boys now are maturing as early as 11 years old. I've had clients that I've worked with where their voice changed at a very young age. And it was a matter of them feeling a little bit dominant, but it also created fear in other boys. It created resentment. It created all kinds of things. Girls were afraid. There's a lot of things that create that, but that moment where someone said something that really stuck with you in a negative way, kids can be so cruel, and that becomes a thing for you always that's carried into your adult life. There was an ex-partner of mine worked for Neutrogena, and he worked in skincare for a lot of years. That's been his career. But there was a study that was done that kids that have an incredible amount of acne carries through mentally for them as adults. If you had a really bad skin problem as a child in your adult life, it's a scar that remains. A lot of the things in terms of how we interpret how we sound, again, is a thing that we take into our adult life, which has really helped me when I'm working with a lot of people that don't like the sound of their voices. It's a great foundation for me to start from, to first and foremost, to embrace them, to recognize and respect how they feel, but also to embrace the fact that those voices have value. They're not devalued just because you have a certain impression of them or because one person said something to you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. Earlier, you also mentioned the value of your voice, and I think this ties back to the core values that we hold true to ourselves. When you think about building connections, honesty, visibility through your core values,
Yeah.
how did those become leadership principles rather than just personality traits?
I've had several people call me a goody goody when I say that honesty for me is a core value that I've held my whole life, that I need to be honest about things. And some people say, well, you're such a goody goody. I'm like, no, I'm not. First of all, I teach authenticity. If honesty wasn't a core value of mine, I'm in trouble. But it really is about the feeling of the honesty and the connection with somebody else. That core value is one of the ways that I show connection, that I feel connection with people. When it comes to my work in the voiceover industry, where I've worked for, a number of years, the connection with an audience, which ties back to those puppet shows, which ties back to those audio recordings of connection and honesty, really have become the core values that have permeated my whole life. personally and professionally.
I think we should all be honest people and truly step into that as a core value. Something that stood out to me is you probably have clients that you'll meet and they'll come into it trying to paint a picture that they want others to see, but in reality, the tone of their voice and the way they deliver doesn't appear as honest as they're coming off. Would you agree to that? And do you have any examples?
Yes. What I do when I work with clients, particularly one-on-one, we work in a number of different fashions. We'll do full-on workshops for companies and corporations, for presentations, for conventions, but there's also a one-on-one course. What happens in this particular part of the course, I'll let you in on a little secret, that part of the homework that people do before they start working with us is we have them collect a sampling of people in their personal life and people in their professional life. And we have those people answer a survey question. It's a 1-question survey. It's first of all, before we start working with them, how they're being received by the people in their personal life and their professional life and how they show up. That's a key piece of this. How am I being received with compassion? Do I have patience? Do I have an honesty? Do I have a place where I'm blocking? Do I feel like I'm defensive? And people are incredibly honest about it. So before we even sit down for our first session, I have a glimpse of how you're being received by others. I think that for me is a really powerful piece. I do have a client that I worked with that was in the process of selling a company, and all of the meetings he was having with investors were on Zoom. The first 50 meetings he had with them on Zoom didn't go anywhere. The broker that was working with him said, what if we turn the camera off? The next 25 meetings, there was no camera. I said to him, you didn't get any further with the next 25 either, did you? And they said, no. What was happening was he was trying to dumb down his intelligence to make the company an easier sell. As the head of the company, he was basically saying, well, that's not an area that I really deal with, so somebody else deals with it. He was trying to make the sale more turnkey. What was happening was people were distrusting from the very beginning the conversation because he was trying to elicit a lack of intelligence, and it didn't go well. They knew that he couldn't possibly be this unintelligent if he bought and sold 5 companies. It was impossible. The more that he tried to make it an easy sell, it shot him in the foot. So this is what I'm saying is that the sound of what they heard was inauthenticity. It wasn't lack of intelligence. He was trying to create one angle he thought was easy, and it actually blew up in his face.
Yeah, it backfired essentially.
Inauthentic, backfired on him. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting too because there is a level of emotional intelligence, right, with our own self-awareness and the social awareness of the situation that we're in. And if we can be more aware of when our voice gives off a sense of distrust, meaning that I don't think you're truly being authentic with me right now. I think that there's more that you're not sharing here. So there's also potentially a lack of transparency. There is some diversion there that I heard too, based on some of it not being something he wants to speak to. And so I could see how that created an environment of distrust. I think we all have our own kind of examples of how that's come across, but interesting to hear. I know you've given us a bit of background on the program itself, but walk us through the moment where you lost your voice. You have been a voice actor, so tell us a little bit about what you were doing professionally at the time. And how did the diagnosis impact you emotionally?
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because every time I tell it, it's reliving it, but it empowers me every time I say it. I was a voice actor for a number of years. Voice actors, if you don't know what that is, anytime you see a commercial or a movie trailer or an animated series or a video game, the voices you hear that you don't see the faces, that's what a voiceover is. For years, I voiced hundreds of commercials and promos and documentary narrations and movie trailers. Great career, incredibly lucrative. I came to Los Angeles from Boston, which is where I grew up, and my vision and dream was always to work in Hollywood, and that dream had come true. Incredibly successful financially. I don't say that egotistically. I say it to set up the fall that came after this. Out of nowhere, my voice suddenly started to not work, meaning that I couldn't project my voice. I had no idea why. One day, a word that began with a vowel was a problem. I aspirated, And then words with consonants became a problem. Then sentences became a problem. Paragraphs became a problem. It became a spiral that I couldn't get out of. And I couldn't trust my voice as a voice actor. And I ended up being diagnosed with a disorder called spasmodic dysphonia. Those of you that may know who Robert Kennedy Jr. is, if you see footage of him, the way he speaks is a very severe case of spasmodic dysphonia. That is an example of it in real time. For someone who works in the voiceover field, the voice field, and who I said has always loved his voice, suddenly is in a position where he's told that his voice doesn't work. The only treatment of choice for this particular disorder was putting Botox injections into the vocal cords, because the belief by the medical establishment is that this is a neurological disorder that causes brain waves to go to your vocal cords and causes them to spasm involuntarily. So the thought was, if we put Botox into the vocal cords, now the vocal cords, as you may know, are muscles that move. And when you're trying to inject into the skin, it freezes the muscles. But if you inject Botox into muscles that cause you to speak, when they freeze, you don't speak. The treatment for not speaking was not speaking. So you can imagine someone like me, I'm going, yeah, that's not an option for me. I ended up working with the only doctor in the world at the time that treated this disorder without Botox, because his belief was we all have what's called a vocal identity. We walk the planet trying to sound like leaders, wives, partners, friends, brothers, sisters, doesn't matter who you are. We walk around trying to chameleonize our voices to sound the way we think others want us to sound. So what happened to me was I was a classically trained voice actor, but I worked in a business where the words "in a world," which you've all heard from a movie trailer, that's a classic movie trailer line. My goal was to try and to compete with other actors who had voices that were already raspy, already damaged, because the belief on my end was if I sound like that more, I'll work more. And I did. Until I didn't, because what I was doing was putting on a voice that was inauthentic on top of my acting chops, and my vocal cords couldn't sustain the inauthenticity, and that's why they strangled. So here I am, no voice, incredibly successful, and now don't know who in God's name I am. I lost every ounce of my identity when I lost my voice. It was the darkest day of my life. It was the darkest period in my life. And I went into a financial, creative, and emotional spiral where I declared bankruptcy on my 2 homes. I lost my cars. I lost everything I had worked for. Coming out the other side of this in Hollywood, you're damaged goods. All they're going to think is, I'm saying, who's going to want this from me anymore? But working with this doctor, I became his apprentice for 4 years. He took me on as a client and then had me work with him because his comment to me was, you have an ear like I've never heard before. You have an understanding and a belief and a knowledge of when someone is speaking inauthentically. That became a moment, Amanda, that turned my life around, where I realized my purpose that I thought I had was a new purpose. I started to teach actors to not do what I did, which was to not speak inauthentically. And what started happening was they started booking more work. They started becoming more successful as voice actors. They would come to me and say, I had no idea it was this easy to speak simply authentically and to book jobs. In that doctor's office, what we did was we worked with people in groups. That's as a patient as I was and as with other people, where the doctor would have us talk to each other. My voice had been so trapped in my throat that he moved it, helped me move it back up into what we call the mask of the face. This is where all good and great voices come from. And as we would talk to other people, they would compliment us on our voices. Most people would say, I immediately said to the doctor, I'm going to sound like a cartoon character. I'm not going to sound like a voice actor. No one's going to want this voice. And he kept saying, just leave it alone. Follow what I'm having you do. What started happening was I started booking voiceover work again. So the people in this room came from all over the world, and they weren't voice actors. They were CEOs. They were entrepreneurs. They were wives and husbands. They were singers. And I'm going, wait a minute. She's a CEO. He's an entrepreneur, and they're not actors. I thought it was a voice actor's problem. What I realized, it was a global communications problem. Everybody came from cross-culture, socioeconomic differences. Everyone had the same disorder, but came from different parts of the world. What I realized a few years later, after my voiceover business started to thrive, was I took the program that I had created for actors and started to create it for executives. so that people could learn how to find the authenticity of their own truth. That's what we call the TrueTell. The definition of the TrueTell is your 100% authentic opinion about everything you talk about. So be it an actor, a CEO, an entrepreneur, you and I, the conversation you and I are having right now is very authentic.
Right.
For those of you watching and listening, you're hearing the sound of authenticity. Notice I'm not sounding scripted. I'm speaking very passionately, as Amanda knows what I speak very passionately.
Yes.
That's where it comes from. It comes from a place of knowing my purpose is to help empower people to find that authenticity in themselves. Because when you're connected to what you say, you will sound authentic.
I resonate with that because of a few reasons. So, one, everyone reaches a point in their life where they are reevaluating what their self-identity is.
Absolutely.
I don't think anybody just stays the same because we grow and we
No.
learn from different situations that we encounter. And what's really inspiring about your story here is your voice was everything to you in this field of voice acting. The moment that you lost the connection between what you were doing and your actual voice. Yes, you went through a period, that dark place, as you mentioned. We have to. We are humans. It's normal to reflect and be in our own thoughts with, oh my gosh, what am I going to do from here? Is this going to ruin my career? Well, there's a lot of those intrusive thoughts that come up. But what you chose to do was get past that stage and think about, okay, so now this is my situation. Where do I go with my voice from here? Then in turn ended up meeting with this doctor and really trusting his process, because it almost sounded like there was even a moment of doubt there as to like, how do you continue, and trusting in his process and his advice, and then opening you up to this whole world of other people that come from different backgrounds and professions, all kind of having a similar issue but impacting them in different ways. You then found a way to create something really beautiful and admirable from my perspective. And it's definitely something that is needed, because as the generational shift happens, we are still seeing executives that stick to the traditional of, this is how I have to sound. This is how I have to deliver the message that I need to speak about. This is how I want people to perceive me. But when we focus too much on that, we're losing sight of that authenticity and connection that really is important to build those connections. I appreciate you sharing that part of your journey, because you didn't create this business on a whim, right? You took the time to process that and think about something that would be meaningful, and then helped other CEOs in the process. I love that for you.
Thank you for that. It took a number of years for me to really do this, because the old adage goes, those that do, those that don't teach. There's an idea in my head that said, people are going to hear that, oh, do you hear Dave Walsh is coaching now? He's not doing voiceover anymore. So there was always that fear that if I started doing this, people were going to say I'm damaged goods, right? So there's that impression. The corporate world doesn't know that about me, or the business world doesn't know that, but the voiceover world did. The truth was, I came from a teaching family. My dad was an elementary school principal for 38 years of his life. And his whole idea was, so I was surrounded by education. One of the things that I did, again, not being the gay kid that played baseball, I would also play school. I would be a teacher. I would have the kids in the neighborhood be the students and I'd be the teacher. There was something about the world of teaching, of doing that made me feel valued. The TrueTell itself really didn't explode until 2014. Here I am now as a teacher, taking my past and my dad's history and legacy and marrying it to something that I love to do. That became a natural place for me to be able to teach. And when I started to expand that, trying to take what I did for actors and putting that into a business paradigm was painful. It was growing pains, because executives didn't want a long-winded description of how to tap into authenticity. It's more of taking what we do for actors, where actors find a bit more color in how they find that path, and making it much more efficient for executives. That took some time to do. In fact, There was some pushback initially because a couple of executives said to me, you're not going to get an executive to be vulnerable. And what happened was in a workshop I did, there was a sales convention in San Francisco for a high-end furniture company, and they had me as their last event of the week. At 8 a.m. on a Friday morning, everybody's assembled together. And I have this exercise that I do called Who Am I? There's a gal that came up. She was the senior vice president of sales. This is 8:15 on a Friday morning. They've been drinking. They've been partying. They've been meeting all week. They're exhausted. She gets up there and she says, I am so-and-so, and I am the senior vice president of sales. My department, I have an incredible 18-year success run. My department closes like no one's business. And then she pauses. Now, the two CEOs of the company are sitting in the audience. And she says, but it's at home that I'm failing my children. The audience literally goes, oh my God. And I said, expand on that. She said, I am so good at my job that when I come home, I have nothing for my kids. I am empty. So she's literally, her balance is this. The ability for an executive in front of the CEOs to be that vulnerable told me we had it. We had something where people didn't have the opportunity, Amanda, to step forward, someone to give them the space to be vulnerable, to be empathetic, to be sincere, to be connected to what they say, and to have the freedom to be able to do it. Now, is that the case in every company? No, of course it isn't. But what it told me was, even at the individual level, there was an incredible need for this kind of program.
Yeah, that's amazing that she came out and said that. And I obviously wasn't there, but as you said it, I was envisioning the audience of other executives resonating with her. Probably some of them feeling like, whoa, what did she really just say that? And others feeling like, oh gosh, I'm dealing with the exact same thing. I know as a mother with two kids that when I'm with them, sometimes it is hard to disconnect from my work too, right? If I get an email that comes on my phone, I might read that email. There's even been times where my kids will be talking to me about something and I'm so in what I'm doing that I didn't even hear what they were asking me. I've had to learn in those moments that you really do have to disconnect from certain things to be intentional and involved in that moment with something else. Also, this is why we have a podcast like this, because there are executives that are coming from all different types of backgrounds, cultures, industries that are being vulnerable and sharing parts of their story and insights that they wouldn't necessarily share in a team meeting or at work in general, even if it was applicable to whatever is being discussed. When you're on the drive to work or when you're on the drive home from work, you have a chance to really listen to these type of stories and hopefully leave feeling empowered by that to maybe start an informal conversation with a colleague at work that day, right?
Right.
So that's part of it. I also wanted to go back to the teaching aspect. Do you still or have you taught the TrueTell and the concept of it all to voice actors as well?
Yes.
Or did you kind of leave that part behind when you shifted?
No, it's still very much a part of my day-to-day. The combination of both is still very prevalent, that the curriculum is fantastic. What's really awesome is that each area complements the other, where there are things that I'm discovering on the business side that I incorporate into the voiceover side and vice versa. It's become one well-rounded program. A quick note about when you were talking about CEOs is that leadership takes all kinds. It's not necessarily C-suite only. It is, we are leaders in every aspect of our lives, as parents, as teachers, as coaches, as kids' sports. We're talking about every industry, every level, even from a personal assistant level through directors and manager levels, et cetera. We're all leaders in our own right. This program is applicable to every aspect of life, personal and professional. Talking about the whole thing about working from home or being with your kids at home during COVID, what a lot of the clients we discovered, or the clients discovered, their partners or their spouses or their children's work voices versus their home voices. There is a belief in the culture that we have a personal voice and a professional voice, and that you never notice that in the morning you turn down the personal and turn up the professional, and at night you flip it. This program teaches you how you unify the voices into one voice, because truly we only have one voice that gets turned based on the relationship you have to what you're talking about, the the person you're speaking to and why you're telling the story. The output, the sound, is the byproduct of the conversation you're having, the connection to who you're talking about, the reason behind it, the purpose. All of that will dictate and influence how you sound versus I have a high and whiny voice. Said who? I have a voice that doesn't cut through. Said who? I had a 34-year-old Indian descent man, 34 years old. He's 5'6". He called me one day and said, I don't feel that my employees really value what I say. I had a meeting with him. We were talking about my coming in and working with the company, and he was sitting at the table and he was leaning across the table with his finger talking to me. Come to find out, in the conversation we had that night, he said he was doing it because he didn't think he could be heard. Really? He owned 4 companies. This belief we have about how we're being presented based on maybe not being as tall in stature, or you and I talked about this, about height. People that are incredibly tall, those of you out there that might be very tall, men or women, men who are 6'5", 6'6", 7, women who are 5'11", 6 feet, 6'1". There's a belief people that I know that are very, very tall feel like they are outcast. They don't know that they're being heard because they are at a level that they have to lean down to be heard, to hear, or for people to look up and to talk to them. So even with height, the physical differences among us creates an image that makes us feel we are outside of the norm. We're not heard. We're not appreciated. We're not valued. Just the opposite is true. Every voice, and you mentioned differences in cultures, in traditions, in mores, all of those things make every voice globally relevant and valued and appreciated. The culture now in certain parts of this world are trying to make people feel like they are not important and they're not valued. This program speaks completely against that ideology. This is all about that every voice has value. Never let anyone, and I say this all the time, and you and I talked about this, the name of this episode is never let anyone silence your voice. Those voices are here for a reason. You have a purpose. I'm so thankful that I had to lose something to find out how important and how purposeful voices can be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too because we can be hard on ourselves. We can quickly diminish our accomplishments and the things that we have done or will do in life just because of one moment where we didn't feel heard, or we didn't feel like our voice and our message was relevant to the audience, or that they weren't receiving it in the way that we want it to be received. That's also partly why building a brand for yourself is so important. I think the TrueTell and personal branding really go hand in hand because your brand is what's going to help you identify your core values, your purpose, and your value proposition. But how you actually speak about it also matters, because that's where you're trying to build credibility amongst people, where they know you are speaking authentically, you have an authentic brand, and therefore you can go to experts like yourself to work on that if that's something that you're struggling with throughout your journey. I appreciate you sharing. When we think about voice, truth, and leadership in the 21st century, let's dive into that.
Sure.
What's one major misconception you see in traditional executive presence or leadership development?
That voice needs to be bombastic, that it needs to be, it's going back to a more old school version of leadership where it needs to be loud. It needs to be demanding. It needs to be condescending, that it needs to be authoritative. Some words that are very prevalent in the culture right now. What I have found in my own data and research that we've done, the rank and file is looking for from leadership now is very different. They're looking for transparency and vulnerability. And a number of you may be in industries where there is a dichotomy in terms of the age range, that millennials are working with Gen Zs and Gen Ys. There's a lot of differences in terms of how things are described. Boomers may be working with millennials as well in terms of where the priorities are, that the language and the way that they're working together. There's a lot of vertical tier work we do as well as horizontal work, that more lateral work. That is a very big misnomer, is that leadership still should be under the guise of an old school mentality. is that what employees and what clients are looking for, the culture's looking for, is more of that ability to be approachable, that ability to have a two-way conversation. It's permeated in a number of industries that we work with: human resources, sales, medical. There's so many different industries. What we've noticed is that it is about that vulnerability. That is absolutely what they want from the higher ups.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, we forget that executive presence isn't necessarily those traditional things that you mentioned. It's when you can walk into a room, demand people's attention with your presence. And that does not necessarily mean that it has to be an authoritative presence, right? That I have power, I have authority, and so that's why I demand you to look and notice me. It's not that.
Yeah.
It's when people can really connect with you, they feel your presence when you walk into that room. What we're seeing in this 21st century of being an authentic leader is making sure that people can relate to you. Sharing information is what helps bring out that authentic part of ourselves, because we get to speak about real life experiences, our thoughts, and sometimes our emotions. Obviously, there is a level of emotional intelligence that you want to balance as an executive, and that's fine. There's things that are oversharing in the wrong context, sure, but that doesn't mean that you can't share any of that information or part of your life or those thoughts in another context where, again, you walk into another room and your executive presence looks different to those people because you're relating on different topics and themes, etc. We kind of forget about the executive presence being that people see you, they feel your energy, they are resonating with your messages, they want to learn more, they want to hear more from you. And that's what true executive presence really is.
Absolutely. The sound of relatability comes from the connection to the people you're talking to, the people that are your employees, that are your clients, and understanding their wants and needs, and in your own comfort level with addressing those things, as opposed to standing behind a defensive desk, standing behind a defensive podium and pontificating. People can pick that up in 2 seconds. It's not necessarily sometimes, like you said, volume. It isn't about the volume of what you say. It's what you say and your connection to what you say that will translate into how it sounds to other people. And that's where vulnerability comes from. Your ability to be that vulnerable makes the people in your presence that vulnerable.
Yeah.
But it's got to start. It's an inside job. It's not a job where you try to create a sound of leadership. It's the connection to the people and the dogma that's part of your life, the morals and the values, the things that you hold true, that will elevate the sound of your TrueTell, your 100% authentic opinion.
Yeah, I love that. And you don't have to be a people person necessarily to do that either. My husband is probably one of the most introverted people you will meet, but you put him in the right setting where he feels he can share and not have to feel robotic in his responses or feel like he has to portray this specific image of him. When he's truly stepping into who he is, how he thinks, and what matters to him, he can open up a whole bunch of conversations. He works in the banking industry. He has to work with clients all the time, even though he's not necessarily a people person.
Right.
But he's found a rhythm that works for him and how to show up authentically in those situations. And so this is not just for people that like other people, right? This is for anybody.
It is. And I love that you just brought that up, because when he lives in the world he lives in, he's living in the financial banking world, but he's an introvert. Okay. He's found a rhythm of authenticity to your words that works for him. This, again, is about people being accepted for what they bring to the table, the value of who they are. Introverted, extroverted, I don't care. It's really about what the value is of you. This also brings up the whole idea of the neurodivergent community. ADHD, autism, the ability for people in this world of how they think. I had a partner I was dating for a while who is ADHD and is slightly on the spectrum. The appreciation I got for understanding how he processes the world, which to other people, they might be not as patient. It taught me so much about the value that neurodivergent people bring to the workplace, to the community, to relationships. Not that I didn't know that before, but it's giving people the space to be and to be valued and not be told that they are infringement on the productivity of the workplace. The whole idea that people have a concept of autistic people or ADHD, that they're not as valued and not as thriving as other people. This program completely speaks against that every voice contributes to the whole. Introverted people, extroverted people, wherever they are. It's the power of that. Going back to the first word we used was the word connection. It's the connection that we all bring that really fuels that whole idea of community and that feeling of leadership.
Yeah. Something stood out to me one time. I attended an event, and we hear disabilities in terms of people that are on the spectrum and beyond. And Thomas Leon said that he likes to call it differing abilities instead of disabilities, because
I like that.
disabilities gives the impression that you can't do something because of this disability, where no, it's truthfully, all have differing abilities,
Absolutely.
and that should be embraced no matter what the context is.
Yeah, I have never, in fact, it's so funny you say that. I've never thought of ADHD and autism as a disability. I don't think of it as that. And I'm not saying that because I don't have connection to it. It's that it is an ability. It's a different contribution, And I love that you brought that up because that is very, very true. It's very true. Yeah.
So we're coming towards the end of our time here, Dave, and it's been a pleasure having you with me. I mean, we could go on and on all day.
You and I could talk the whole
There's
day.
there's a lot
So much
more
to
to
cover.
unpack here, but that's why I want people to connect with you after this, so that way they can engage in further conversation and to learn a little bit more about their own voice, things that they didn't even think about previously. So what's the best way for folks to connect with you after this?
The easiest way to do that is to go to our website, which is the TrueTell.com, TheTrueTell.com. Very simple. You can also reach me via my email, dave@thetruetell.com, and our socials, which are the TrueTell. Yeah, please reach out. Anyone that feels that you're being marginalized, feeling that you need that leg up, feeling that you're going in, and whether it's for a presentation, whether it's an improvement in the enrichment of your own life, there's a multitude of reasons you can come and work with us, or at least reach out to us. I'd be more than happy to have the conversation. Totally.
Yeah, even a discovery conversation, because it's a pretty inspiring concept and something that we should really lean into more, especially when we focus on authenticity. So you all have heard where to connect with Dave, and we hope that you begin to use your voice to empower others as well. You can start doing that. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, download the episodes on Spotify, share the podcast with other leaders that you believe could benefit. With that, thank you all for tuning in to the Multifaceted Executive Podcast, where each episode reminds us that leadership looks different from every seat at the table. Cheers.
Amen.